Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. This week I'm going to bring your attention to an album by an artist named Moor Mother and her album, Analog Fluids of Sonic Black Holes. Now I discovered this album last year, shortly after the George Floyd riots. And if you've been following my post around that time, I kind of dedicated myself to looking into experimental black musicians, experimental black music, in an effort to kind of broaden my scope of what black voices were saying in and around that time, and more recently too. What makes this album amazing? Because it is an amazing album. Isn't the normal things that I would, especially as a white listener, be drawn to? It's not super melodic. It's more about texture, and it's more about the message. And my deepening understanding of the importance of message in black music, I think, was really pushed along by my growing appreciation of this album. In a very superficial sense, this album sort of sits at this interesting crossroads between spoken word and rap and noise rock and techno and industrial music and punk in some ways, punk rock as well. And this is a reflection of Moor Mother's diverse musical background, her diverse musical tastes. But I really came to appreciate this album when I started framing it in terms of listening to it almost like a Death Grips album.
5, 4, 3, 2, yo, and you don't wanna flow with the sun. The war's already been won. It's not the math of one. No shade, no sun, no bullet, no gun. Death or run, it's done. 1,000 miles in one. Yo, cause they don't wanna see me shine from the start to the finish line. They keep their head on the 9, cause it's only a matter of time. 5, 4, 3, 2. 5, 4, 3, 2. Cause after they come for me, they gon' come for you.
And the album is pretty superficially very noisy. You know, it not only does it have this non-dance hip hop aspect to it. I mean, it's not meant to be like a banger style music. It's meant to be contemplated and sat with, and at the same time, it's so in your face. There's a little bit of dissonance there. You don't have to listen to it for very long to start to recognize that there's old black music in here that's being used for a very specific purpose, and that's to kind of recall the past. And that's a really important aspect, I think, of what this album is about, and also of what Moor Mother's general philosophy is about. I think that getting an understanding of her general philosophy is key to understanding how this album, I think, is supposed to be processed, how you're supposed to look at it, how it works. Because Moor Mother is involved with this collective called Black Quantum Futurism. And it's not really just a collective as much as it is a philosophy with a collective of people that have surrounded themselves by it. And Black Quantum Futurism is kind of a leg of Afrofuturism, this idea of looking at what the world would be like. It plays a big what-if game with what the world would be like if instead of having a Eurocentric idea of the future and possibilities, what if it was coming from a black perspective? And classic ideas of Afrofuturism are things like Sun Ra and Parliament, Parliament Funkadelic in their 70s space, the Mothership Connection, that idea. In your mind, you see pictures of kind of like black aliens and a relationship with science fiction and that sort of thing. And it's always been sort of an aesthetic and a way of talking about the black condition. And what I think is interesting about Black Quantum Futurism, as I understand it, is that it's sort of a version of that, but rather than talking about outer space or a relationship with the universe in a more kind of 20th century rocket to the moon sense, it's more like post-string theory idea about science fiction, where space and time collapse. And there's this sort of idea, almost like time travel, where you can take the past, you can take the future, and view both of them together as almost like you're some sort of like a Time Lord almost would. I think the title of this album points to this practice, this theory, and this practice, because the idea of a black hole, we all know the classical idea of a black hole is something that bends time. And if you look at how this album is structured, it sort of has this cyclic structure of going back through various points in history and talking about the sort of inevitability of violence against black and indigenous people and black and indigenous bodies. And there's text in there about sugar plantations and cotton plantations. There's songs in there that address the race riots with Rodney King in 92. There's songs in there that talk about the 20th century, mid-20th century race riots in Chicago. And then just the idea of the daily possibility of violence that a black person has just, coming up to a street light.
The myth hold weight like, the myth hold weight like, all the money from sugar, right? Like all the money from sugar, right? Build the street, turn right. At the stoplight where I read my rights and I read my wrongs. Guess I'm not going home.
I think one of the overarching messages embedded on this album texturally, as far as the lyrics go, is a sense that that's what's happened before will continue to happen. This idea of the potential of violence that black lives live under on a day-to-day basis due to sort of this delusional lie of a post-racial America. This idea is so well-formed in Moor Mother's lyrics. It's so truthful and so honest a viewpoint that it's the standout feature of the album. Lyrically, this album is completely devastating due to its adherence to that idea, using this Black Quantum Futurism, I think, idea as a lens to talk about these things. And as devastating as Moor Mother's lyrics are, as harshly real as they are with the history that has bound black culture to these conditions. Musically, it also points in that direction. Every vibration, every molecule of this album points in that direction. And with the use of African American spirituals and the almost alchemical feeling of the soundscape that she uses, it's partially why the album is so unsettling. Is because it's so in your face about what it's trying to say. And especially as a white person listening to it, as a white person wanting to listen to this album, it feels like an uncomfortable conversation with the black past, to sort of cop a line from Emmanuel Acko.
It's so soft to the skin when you land on the cotton fields of democracy. It's so soft. And my mama, my grandmama, my great-grandmother, they picked so much cotton, they saved the world. They picked so much cotton, they saved the world. All by themselves, they saved the world. And it's so soft.
It's not an easy listen as a white person, because a lot of what the text is about is an indictment of the past that we have shared with them, and the inequalities that are embedded in that past. But it's also one that I think needs to be said. It's important that we as white audiences listen to these uncomfortable moments in music. So in that regard, I think the Analog Fluids of Solid Black Holes is incredibly successful. It was an album that ended up being a top 10 album for me last year, and has really opened up my ideas about what's possible, not just in terms of spoken word music, because that was a big change for me on this one, to really have felt a spoken word album so deeply, but also an album that helps to peel the scales off of my eyes a little bit and keep them open and be real about other people's voices and being open to that, despite the fact that it may be uncomfortable to listen to.
Nightmare shit, LA 92 shit, LAPD or PCP, body bag for you and me. And y'all all watch Rodney King. 57 hits in the death of a dream.
I think this is a pretty important album personally, but it's also not one that you're going to want to take home to your parents and listen to during your, while you open up your Christmas gifts. It's definitely going to be one that you listen to and contemplate on your own. And for some people, the the abrasiveness of the album may be too much. I would encourage you to look past that a little bit and look into what Moor Mother's saying. And even if that feels uncomfortable, allow yourself to stand back a little bit and think about what she's saying and why she's saying it. Because in its own way, it's actually extremely beautiful, despite the fact that it may make me, as a person who is part of what she's talking about, uncomfortable. So I would really suggest Moor Mother's Analog Fluids and Solid Black Holes for a multitude of reasons, but not the least of which is the message that it takes with it. That's all I got on it for this week, guys. So I really appreciate you hanging in there and listening to me on this one. So if you like this video, please like, subscribe, and share it out with your friends. Listen to me over on Spotify. I'll put another Moor Mother track up over there. And I'll see you guys next week. Until then, catch you on the flip side.
One of the curators was like, yeah, your music's a bit difficult to get into. And
Curator.
Yeah. And then so I was on stage and I was just like, difficult? You know, it sounded like a poem, but I was like, what you mean difficult? You know what I mean? Like, it's not like I'm doing some fantasy. What do you mean? People are getting shot. Like,